When we think of the First World War, we often imagine American soldiers arriving in Europe, tipping the balance in 1917 and 1918. But what if the United States had never joined the war? What if the Allies had fought on alone, without American men, weapons, and money? The story of the Great War would have unfolded very differently, with consequences that might have changed the entire 20th century. By 1917, the war had already dragged on for 3 brutal years. Millions were dead, and both sides were exhausted. The Allies, Britain, France, and their partners were running dangerously low on money and supplies. The Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, were stretched thin, but Germany's armies were still strong. Historically, the United States entered the war in April 1917, sending fresh troops and enormous financial support. But in this alternate history, Washington stays neutral, and President Wilson never declares war. Without American loans, the Allies would have faced severe financial collapse. Britain had nearly emptied its gold reserves by 1917. France was even worse off, dependent on foreign loans to keep its army supplied with shells and rifles. The US had become the banker of the Allies, sending billions across the Atlantic. Without that money, the Allies might not even pay for food. On the battlefield, the absence of American troops would have been felt immediately. In reality, by 1918, over 2 million American soldiers were deployed in Europe, filling the exhausted Allied ranks. Without them, the French and British would have been forced to hold the front lines with tired, depleted armies. The German High Command, led by Ludendorff and Hindenburg, knew they had a small window of opportunity. In 1918, they launched the Spring Offensive, a massive push to break through before the Americans arrived in full force. In actual history, the Allies held the line, thanks in part to fresh American divisions. But without the US presence, Germany's offensive might have broken through. Imagine German troops pushing deeper into France, possibly reaching Paris once again. The French army, already shaken by mutinies in 1917, might have collapsed under the pressure. The British, though determined, were stretched thin and might have been forced to retreat toward the Channel ports. With no fresh reinforcements, the Allies would have struggled to stop Germany's momentum. Some historians believe Germany could have forced a negotiated peace in 1918 on far more favorable terms. Instead of surrender, Berlin might have demanded recognition of its gains in Belgium, Eastern Europe, and perhaps even colonies overseas. Austria-Hungary, though weak, would have survived longer under German protection. The Ottoman Empire, still clinging to life, might not have collapsed as quickly either. Russia, already out of the war after the Bolshevik Revolution, had signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany. That treaty gave Germany control over vast parts of Eastern Europe. Without America, those gains might have stuck. Germany might have created a massive sphere of influence stretching from Poland to Ukraine. This would have made Germany the dominant power in Europe, overshadowing Britain and France. But even if Germany had not won outright, the war would have dragged on much longer. The stalemate of trenches might have continued through 1919 or even 1920, as neither side had the strength to deliver a knockout blow. The suffering would have been immense. Millions more could have died from continued fighting, starvation, and disease. The Spanish flu, which already killed millions in 1918, would have struck exhausted soldiers still stuck in trenches. Civilians, starved by blockades, would have faced even harsher winters. The war-weary populations of France and Britain might have demanded peace at almost any cost. Strikes, protests, and revolts could have erupted, forcing governments to negotiate. It's even possible that Britain or France could have collapsed politically, much as Russia did in 1917. In Germany, however, the absence of total defeat might have meant no abdication of the Kaiser. Instead of a fragile republic born in humiliation, Germany might have remained a monarchy. Without Versailles, there would be no crushing reparations, no humiliation to fuel anger. And without that anger, perhaps Adolf Hitler would never have risen to power. The Second World War, at least in the form we know, might never have happened. But a German-dominated Europe might have created a different kind of long-term tension. Would Britain have accepted German control of the continent? Or would it have waited for another chance to fight? Would France have lived under German shadow, bitter but powerless? And what of the colonies? Without US influence, European empires might have lasted longer. India, Africa, and the Middle East might have seen independence delayed for decades. The United States itself would have remained on the sidelines, still a rising power, but less entangled in Europe. Perhaps America would have focused even more on Latin America and the Pacific instead. This alternate history also raises questions about technology. American industry produced tanks, airplanes, and weapons in staggering numbers during the war. Without that contribution, the pace of innovation might have slowed. Post-war economies, too, would have looked very different. The US became a global financial center because of its role in the war. Without intervention, London might have kept that crown. The 1920s in Europe might not have been the same age of instability and bitterness. Instead, it could have been an uneasy peace, overshadowed by German dominance. Would democracy have survived in such a Europe? Or would authoritarian systems have spread more quickly? The absence of American intervention leaves us with endless possibilities. What is certain is that millions of lives might have been spared from the Second World War. Yet millions more might have died if the First War had dragged on longer without resolution. It is one of history's greatest what-ifs. Without American intervention, the world map today might look nothing like the one we know. The fate of nations, empires, and ideologies would have turned on different paths. Germany might have been the superpower of the 20th century. The Soviet Union might have remained weaker and more isolated. The United States might have taken decades longer to become a global leader. And the idea of a united democratic Europe might never have taken root. Instead, a different order could have emerged, one shaped by negotiation, empire, and spheres of influence. Of course, this is speculation, but rooted in the realities of 1917 and 1918. The truth is, American entry changed everything. It gave the Allies strength when they were on the brink of collapse. It shifted the balance of money, manpower, and morale. And it ended the war far sooner than it might have otherwise ended. Whether that was for better or worse is still debated by historians. But one thing is clear: the world we live in today was shaped by that decision. The intervention of the United States ensured Allied victory. Without it, history would have been written in a very different ink. Perhaps darker, perhaps lighter, but certainly not the same. The First World War remains a lesson in how one choice can change the course of history forever. And the question of what might have been will always haunt our imagination.